a trade war unlike any other. For decades, North America was a well-oiled economic machine, a seamless triangle of trade between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Factories in Mexico churned out auto parts for American cars. Canada supplied oil, aluminum, and critical minerals for US industries. In return, Washington played the role of economic overseer, ensuring stability and influence over its two closest neighbors. But that balance just shattered. Canada and Mexico have struck a trade deal so bold, so strategically disruptive, that Washington is left reeling. And this isn't just another economic handshake. It's a move that directly counters the United States' latest trade offensive. Because just weeks ago, the US government made a high-stakes gamble. It imposed a sweeping new wave of tariffs, targeting key industries under the guise of protecting American jobs: steel, aluminum, automobiles, electronics, even agricultural goods. The message from Washington was clear: America first is back with a vengeance. But instead of buckling under US pressure, Canada and Mexico have just flipped the script. They responded not with retaliation, not with protests, but with something far more powerful: a trade alliance of their own. And if the details of this deal unfold the way analysts predict, it could fundamentally rewrite North American trade as we know it. The historical roots of a brewing conflict. To truly grasp the magnitude of this shift, we need to rewind back to 1994, when NAFTA was signed. The North American Free Trade Agreement was supposed to be a golden era for trilateral trade. It created the largest trading bloc in the world, eliminating tariffs, integrating supply chains, and allowing industries to flourish across borders. Mexico became a powerhouse for manufacturing. Canada solidified its role as a vital energy and materials supplier, and the US enjoyed a privileged position at the center of it all. But Washington has always had an uneasy relationship with free trade. Over the years, administrations have oscillated between embracing globalization and fearing it. Jobs were lost, factories closed, and populist movements began demanding economic nationalism, a push to bring manufacturing back to American soil, regardless of the consequences. By 2018, NAFTA was replaced with USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, a renegotiated trade pact that Washington insisted on, adding stricter labor conditions, intellectual property protections, and rules favoring American industries. But behind the diplomatic smiles, tensions remained. Canada and Mexico never forgot how Washington strong-armed them into the deal. And now, just as North American trade was stabilizing, the US has torpedoed that fragile peace with a fresh wave of tariffs. And that's when Canada and Mexico decided they'd had enough. The US economic power play and why it backfired. The latest rounds of tariffs from Washington wasn't just aggressive, it was unprecedented. The government justified them as a way to reclaim industrial dominance, targeting imports that supposedly undercut American production. But the reality? It wasn't just China or Europe that got hit. Canada and Mexico, two of America's most loyal trade partners, suddenly found themselves lumped in with economic rivals. Steel and aluminum imports from Canada? Taxed. Automotive parts from Mexico? Taxed. Lithium, semiconductors, and agricultural exports? Tariffed. The reaction was immediate. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the move a betrayal of North American economic cooperation. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador went further, warning that these tariffs would push Mexico to seek alternative trade routes. And that's exactly what happened. Behind closed doors, negotiators from both countries began drafting a countermeasure, a bilateral trade pact that would deepen their economic ties, reduce dependence on the US, and attract outside players into the mix. In essence, they've just built a North American trade alliance without Washington. The fallout: Washington never saw this coming. This isn't just about trade, it's about power. For years, Washington has dictated the terms of North American commerce. It set the rules, brokered the deals, and wielded economic leverage to ensure that both Canada and Mexico remained dependent on US markets. But with this new deal, that leverage is slipping. Canada and Mexico are no longer waiting for Washington's approval. They are actively forging a path that could make US tariffs obsolete. And here's where it gets even more shocking. The world is already paying attention. European and Asian investors are now eyeing Canada and Mexico as their new trade getaway into North America, one that bypasses the costs of US tariffs. Japan is in talks to invest in Mexican automotive plants. German steel manufacturers are negotiating with Canadian suppliers. Even Chinese tech firms, battered by US sanctions, are exploring partnerships to move production into these newly fortified economic hubs. And if this momentum continues, Washington won't just lose control over North American trade, it might find itself on the outside looking in. Because for the first time in decades, Canada and Mexico aren't just reacting to US policies, they are rewriting the rules entirely. The road ahead. This new trade alliance is still in its infancy, but its implications are enormous. The question now is, how will Washington respond? Will the US double down on tariffs, escalating this into a full-blown trade war? Will it attempt to renegotiate with its neighbors to maintain economic influence? Or worse, will this fracture the North American trade bloc entirely, sending global markets into chaos? One possibility is that the US will be forced into diplomatic damage control, seeking new trade agreements or concessions to bring Canada and Mexico back into alignment. But the longer Washington hesitates, the more entrenched this new trade order will become. Meanwhile, investors and multinational corporations will have to make tough decisions. Do they stick with the uncertainty of American policies, or do they pivot to the new, emerging North American trade corridor? If this new alliance proves successful, US industries could find themselves at a competitive disadvantage, paying higher costs for materials and losing access to crucial supply chains. On the geopolitical front, this development could send ripple effects across other economic blocs. The European Union and Asian economies will be watching closely, recalibrating their own trade strategies based on the outcome of this standoff. If Canada and Mexico can thrive without US economic dominance, it could embolden other nations to seek alternative trade arrangements, weakening Washington's global economic influence. The next moves in this geopolitical chess game will determine the future of North American commerce. One wrong step and the US risks losing control of the very economic foundation it spent decades building. But one thing is certain: Washington never saw this coming. And now, the balance of power in global trade may be shifting before our very eyes. This is just the beginning of a trade war that could redefine economic alliances for years to come. But what led us to this moment? How did the United States go from being the undisputed leader of North American trade to being challenged by its closest allies? Let's take a deeper look at the history, the tensions, and the hidden forces behind this shocking economic shift.